quit Slack. So if anyone here wants to say anything, please put it in the chat window for me to find if you can't see my screen or anything like that. But I've officially turned off Slack because it's distracting. I'm going to share my screen, and you should see nothing but a nice landscape. I'm going to move this over. Okay, so let's look at some things. The first thing I like to look at is my Drupal.org profile page with people, because this is what I'm talking about when we talk about, you know, as you start contributing, you can use this Drupal.org profile page as a sort of resume. My page will look a little bit different than your page because I have some advanced privileges on Drupal, so you might not see some of these same buttons across the top. And that's the same thing when we look at project pages. If you're viewing a project page and you see that I have a couple more buttons, it's because I'm a content moderator, and I look through the queue for spam. So don't be too concerned if you see a couple of extra buttons on my pages. But you know, I give a little bit of history of who I am. You know, right here it tells you how long you've been on Drupal. It gives you a count for how many documentation edits you have. So while you work in the issue queue, you get a different type of credit, but you also get attributions for the documentation pages you help with too. So you can see I don't work too much in the documentation pages. I help maintain some guides on Drupal.org. You know, I have my contributions here, and then I have what issues I've worked on in the last year up here. And you can see not a lot of these are coding issues. You know, I work in the webmaster queue, helping confirm new users on Drupal.org. It's not an easy task because you have to make sure that they're real people, but that's a non-code task and it's fun. You can see that I work with different camps. So that's another way to give back to Drupal is, you know, community projects like Drupal Camp New York City or Bay Area Drupal Camp. You can see, you know, I help organize SF Doug. So a lot of these are community-based projects that I work on, but you can see that I have projects that I've worked on, and usually these are in the contribution workshops or when I mentor folks. So that's sort of the anatomy of this page. But what I like about my page is I have this dashboard, and if I go to my dashboard, this you can configure any way you want. You can add blocks, you can move blocks around. You see here, there's add block. I have Drupal Planet because we're always in a state of professional development. It's nice to see what other folks are talking about and working on. I help do security updates sometimes, not all the time for my agency. So I have a block which gives all the latest security releases. I have a block with my posts, all the posts that I have made, which is different from issues I've created because there's an issue creation one too. I have a block for Drupal core, which I don't use a lot because I tend not to work in Drupal core. I tend to work more in the contributed module space. But this contributor links block is super handy because it has a couple of these integrated in, like my issues. It has a novice issue task or novice task issue link already in there for you. It's got different ideas of how you can contribute back to the project. It talks about community initiatives. So anyway, if you click on this novice issue link, what it does is it pulls up the advanced search feature that we talked about with, you know, some of those extra windows, but it doesn't only bring up Drupal core, but it brings up the Drupal contributed modules too. So you can see, you know, it's tagged novice now. So if we delete that tag and hit reset, you can see it looks a lot different now. For those who can see the differences between the colors, you can tell the issue queue is color coded. It's not always the most accessible for some folks who have color blindness, but they are color coded. So it can be a real quick way to look for issues. You know, green ones are either fixed or reviewed and tested by the community. The yellow ones are needs review, which are great novice issues for the non-coding parts. The red means that they've been worked on, but maybe there's still something missing from the patch, or the patch didn't apply. And then this blue or dark gray, depending on how you look at it, is active, meaning maybe just there's a discussion going on, or the issue has just been reported. Anyway, like I said, you can kind of search by who's following something, and it pre-populates. So if I want to search, like say I'm someone else and I want to search for Volkswagen chick, I would just click this and hit search, and it filters it out by Volkswagen chick. And those are all the things that I have assigned to me. So that's sort of a quick look at the issue queue. But for the sake of time and brevity, I have already found an issue for us to work on. And it's on the CK editor font size and family contributed module. And this is a project page on Drupal.org. All of the projects can be found here, and you can find them at drupal.org/project/ the name of your project, which is the machine name. So the project page, you know, basically gives you a couple of things. You won't see this edit button, but you should see all the other buttons. It quickly sort of just tells you what it's about, who supports it, how many downloads it has, when it was last worked on. This was worked on in May of 2020, and for contributed module, that's okay. You know, looking back at how I had talked about not working on projects that weren't actively maintained, I consider this an actively maintained module. And on the side here, you can see who maintains the project, or not who maintains the project, but who's worked on the project a lot, like some of the committers. Here is the link to the issue queue on all of those. So if we open this in a new tab, we can see all of the issues that are against this. And that's where we go and create our issues. But all of this is found on the project page. But what I want to show is a couple of links, which are handy. There's a documentation link. Not all projects will have this, but a lot of them do. And it's best practices to have an external documentation guide. And if we open that in a different window, we can see that this is a documentation guide. This is one of those guides I was telling you about that you can work on without knowing code. All of these community documentation guides don't have that rigid editorial process like the Drupal.org guides do. So if you're working on a module and you're using the documentation guide and you find a typo or you find something wrong with it, you can simply go to that external documentation guide and click edit. And it's that easy. I live with people who code and they're downloading stuff right now, so my internet's a little slow. So I apologize a little bit. But anyway, you can see that it's super easy to come in here and change a typo, change a link, anything like that. You make your changes, you come down here, you should, best practices, always explain why you made the change. Say it's a grammar thing, but maybe English wasn't the person who wrote its first language. So just explain your changes, and then you hit save, and it's that easy. And if we go back to the page, again, in this drop down next to the edit button, you might not see all of these, but you'll see this discuss button for sure. And you can click on that and you can see the progression of this documentation guide. It looks like this one didn't, but what you will see is all of the comments that were made. And that way, say you helped create this guide 2 years ago, and you keep getting emails that someone is making edits, you can go into this discussion and you can look at it and see what changes were made, and it provides a diff for you. So that is how to contribute to a documentation guide, sort of in a nutshell. You can go to the individual pages. You know, review it for grammar, review it for links, because here's something to think about. Drupal.org just migrated to Drupal 8. So a lot of those links now, the link aliases are different. So sometimes you'll come across here, excuse me, and it'll link to the old site and not give a redirect. So going and fixing links and making sure that they're on the new Drupal 8 site is a good way to give back. So, you know, again, you just hit the edit button, you make your changes, you hit save, and you've contributed to documentation. But that is not why we opened this page. So going back to the project page, on the side here, there's a View Code Repository button. And if you go in here, you can look at the code without having to download it on your local machine. So I was evaluating this module to use on a Stanford site. And the first thing I always do when I review a module is read the README, right? That's a good first step. And what I noticed here in the README was a typo. And I thought, this is a great thing for my next Contrib workshop is we're just gonna go in and we're gonna change this typo. So we're gonna create an issue that outlines what the, you know, summarizes what we found. We're going to download the repository onto our machine. We're going to create a new branch. We're going to make changes to it in our code editor. We're going to create a diff file, which is a patch, and we're going to upload it back to Drupal.org. So that's the fix that we're going to do this morning. I know it seems benign, but this is a great learning experience. So we found a problem. So if we go to my open source pages, which I shared in the chat, if we go to the Drupal folder, I have all kinds of documentation here. It's on Drupal.org, kind of, but because we're making the migration, I don't know where it is. And so I just default to my own resources, because also this is an open source project for me. If you're using this GitHub repository and you find something wrong with my documentation, feel free to make a pull request and help contribute back to Drupal, because all of this will be going back into our mentoring resources, you know, once we get settled. But I have, you know, how to create an issue, how to create a patch, how to apply a patch. So if you want to follow along with the different steps here, you can see, you know, I have create an issue and I give all of the steps for creating an issue. So I'm going to do this real quick, and you might not catch everything, but when it's your turn to go do it, please use this documentation. And once you see it, seeing the documentation makes a little bit more sense. Okay, so I'm going to pull this down into its own window. So we found an issue. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the issue queue. And first, we're going to make sure that the issue doesn't already exist, because we don't want to be redundant. So we're going to search for, think about what we talked about in the slides. Best practices is a short, concise title. So if there was a typo in a README, I would make the general assumption that it would have the word README in the title. So I'm going to say README, and I'm going to, usually the list is a little bit longer. You can see visually that it's not in there, but you just hit search. And if there was an issue with a README, it would be listed here. But just for the sake of making sure it doesn't already exist, because this queue is too small, I'm going to do a quick scan and make sure the issue doesn't exist. And I don't see it. So we're going to select create a new issue. We're going to give it a short, concise title. So I'm going to say README has a typo. I'm going to select a category. It's not a bug. I'm not really asking for anything new. I'm not asking for help. And I'm not creating a roadmap. So this is really just a task. The priority, usually I don't mess with this, but this is one letter change. So we're just going to mark this as a minor. we're not going to change the status right now. We're going to leave it as active because it's just creating the issue, right? The version, because it's a documentation change, we're just going to like tag it for the next cycle. So we're going to add it to the dev branch. This component dropdown changes from module to module. The maintainers can select what they want in this list depending on their project. This one, it's kind of crosses the line of code and documentation, but we're going to say more documentation. It is in the code base, but we're going to say documentation. And then I am going to assign this to myself only because I know in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to be working on this. If I can't guarantee work on it, I'm going to leave it unassigned. And general best practices for working on Drupal core is to not assign it to yourself. You can make a comment that you're working on it, but really that assigning button in Drupal core is for the maintainers. So I'm going to assign this to myself. I'm going to tag this as novice because it's a novice issue. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the issue tag field autocomplete because we have enough tags in the issue queue. So we don't want to add any new tags. And I'm going to use accessibility as an example. We cleared out the issue tags maybe 2 years ago, and we found accessibility spelled many different ways, spelled wrong in most cases. So now we just want people to use the tags that already exist. So we're just going to select the novice tag, but I'm also going to tag this GovCon because we're working at GovCon right now, and I'm going to create this issue and create a patch, but I'm not going to review it and I'm not going to fix it. So if someone in the contributor days coming up want to just search the queue for GovCon, they can like search GovCon and find this issue. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit to adding tags. Is adding tags for camps is an exception to that auto-populate. So a lot of times, like when I start a contribution day, I'll create a tag for a camp. So let that be a little bit to think about, that could be an exception. Drupal now injects this template for us. So it gives us an idea of what to put in our summary. So problem and motivation, I'm going to say, while reviewing the module, I noticed the Readme has a typo. And I'm going to go back to that page and I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to paste it and I'm going to say what the typo was, right? Steps to reproduce, proposed resolution. So we don't need steps to reproduce because there's nothing really to reproduce. So we can eliminate that line. Proposed resolution, we're going to upload a patch and we're going to review a patch. Remaining tasks, we don't really need that. There's no interface changes, there's no API changes, and no data model changes. So you can see that that template really helps with those more complex issues. I'm also going to leave a note here that I am mentoring folks at a contribution workshop at GovCon 2020. Please save this issue for attendees. I do this a lot now. I will tag an issue and ask people to save it for the event because there's nothing like going through hours of creating issues for events and then people work on them before the event and then they're not there for our attendees. I don't feel bad doing this because after the conference, I'll go through and I'll say, we didn't get a chance to work on this, and I'll let people know that it's up for grabs. But I kind of reserve issues sometimes. So we're going to save this issue for attendees, and we're just going to hit save. And what this does is every time you create a new issue on Drupal.org, it creates a unique node. And right now, you don't know it's important, but I'm going to snag that unique node number. And I'm going to add it to a document. And my Zoom stuff is in the way, so I have to move that. So I'm going to move my text editor over here. Excuse me for all my open stuff, but I'm going to save that unique node number because we're going to need it later. Okay, so now we have an issue created. What our next step is we're going to download the repository onto our machine, and we're going to create a branch, and we're going to make the changes and do a diff. So this may be a little bit over some people's heads. We're going to use the command line to do this. So if we go back to this project page, there's a version control button. And if you select the version control button, it takes you to a page that explains how to do this. It explains how to set up the repository for the first time. We want the 8.1 branch. For the sake of brevity though, I'm just going to grab this command here, and in my terminal, I'm going to go to where I want to download the module. So I have CD, which is change directories. I have a place where I download modules in my Drupal modules folder. So I'm going to go into the Drupal modules folder. I'm going to do a PWD. I'm doing this for the sake of people who might not know all these commands as I type them in. PWD is present working directory. So I'm going to confirm my location in that directory to make sure I'm in the place where I want to be. So I am in my Drupal modules folder. So now I've copy and pasted that command, and I'm going to run it. And it's basically just going to clone that code base into that folder for me. So it's done. It doesn't take very long. Drupal core might take a little bit longer. Some of the heavier modules or your internet connection might have something to do with the time. So if it takes a little longer for you, don't worry about it. So anyway, so we're done. So what that command did was we cloned it, and then we also CD'd into that. So we changed directory. So if I do a PWD, you can see that I'm in that CK editor font folder now. Okay, so the next step after we downloaded the repository was to create a new branch. So to create a new branch, you want to do a get checkout -b. And for the sake of consistency, I like to use that unique node number. So let's back up a little bit. We're going to talk about naming conventions for patching for just a second, because this is another reason why it's important to have that unique node number. After we make the changes to our file and we create that diff file, we want to name it. And there's all different kinds of naming conventions. On this page, this is one naming convention. If you go to another page on Drupal.org, you might find another naming convention. So just be known that the documentation isn't consistent across Drupal.org yet, but it is something we're actively working on. But you can see here, we want to use the naming convention of having a description, having an issue number, and having a comment number. Okay, so this comment number is going to be a little tricky. It's the anticipated comment number where you're going to post the patch. So if we go back to our issue, in theory, I'm going to be posting this patch in the next 2 minutes. So my anticipated comment number is 2, okay? But don't worry, if someone goes in there and makes a comment before you upload the patch, it's really easy to change the name to -3, -4, -5, -6. So So if we go back and we see this, you know, we want our git diff, you know, we're just going to make some notes as we go, right? Okay, so our description, okay, we're going to say readme, right? And our issue number is this unique node number here. And our anticipated comment number is 2. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm getting ready to name my branch. And say this is an issue that might go back and forth. I like to name my branches with the patch numbers because it just makes sense to me. So I am going to use this node number -2 going back here to create my branch. So I'm going to do get checkout -b, and I'm going to name it that unique node number and my anticipated comment number, so -2. So now we might not all know this, but what I did was I created a branch, and with that checkout, I'm actually on that branch now. So what I can do is I'm going to open Sublime because that's my favorite text editor right now. I'm going to do a little trick in here. I'm going to say open space dot, and that's going to open my repository in the Finder window for me. And I'm just going to drag my whole folder into my text editor, and there it is. So I'm in the text editor, I'm on a new branch. The one fix we want is right here. So I'm going to be really simple, and I'm not going to do anything else to this file right now for the sake of brevity and because it's a workshop. There might be other things wrong with it, and I do recommend that if there are other things, to just fix them all at once. But we're not going to do that right now. We're just going to do the one typo. So we fixed the change. We're going to hit Command S to save it. If we go back to our terminal and we do a get status, wondering where we are in our get, right? It's going to say that we modified the README. Great. That's what we wanted, right? So I'm confident with that. So I'm going to add my changes with get add dot, which if there's a lot of changes across files, I don't recommend, but this is just one file. So we're going to do get add period. And if we do a get status now, you can see that we modified that file. So now the next step is committing that file. So for me, we're going to do get commit -m because we're going to make a message. And I go back and I always kind of default to this. No one on the planet besides you is going to see this commit message, but I do recommend using best practices, doing it however you do it at work or whatever you do. So I preface it with my ticket number and I say fixed typo in README. And I commit it and I do a get status just to make sure we have nothing to commit and our working tree is free. So this tells us that we've made changes on this branch. So the next step in our process is to compare the two branches and create a patch file. Here on that version control page, creating a patch, here's our command, get diff description issue comment number dot patch. So we have that here. Say it was a bug fix or a UI change or accessibility. Your description would, instead of README, read accessibility or white screen of death on something, you know, just keep it really, really brief, 1, 2, 3 words for that description. But usually I just put the title of the file I'm changing when it's just one file. So I'm going to copy that command, go back into the terminal and paste it. And so now in theory, I have a patch file in that repository. So if I go back to the Finder, you can see that I have a patch right in there. So now I do this for iteration. We downloaded onto our machine, we created a new branch, we made the changes, we committed the changes, we did a diff between the changes, we created a diff file, a patch, and now we're going to upload it to Drupal.org. So we go back to our issue queue, We make sure that the metadata is still relevant. You know, it's still novice. We're still at GovCon. I'm going to unassign myself at this point because I am done working on it now. And then I am going to say, I'm going to change this to needs review because I've uploaded the fix. So I changed the metadata. So now I'm going to say I uploaded a patch that corrects the typo in the Readme. I am unassigning myself so attendees of the workshop can review. I scroll down here, attributing this contribution. This is for metrics for Drupal.org. They like to know if people are getting paid company time or if they're volunteering their own time. So I'm on the clock. I'm getting paid to give this training, which is super nice, right? That's a great privilege to have. I get paid to work on Drupal. So I have here the agency I work for. If you have more than one agency on your profile page, you'll see some checkboxes. And say I was working for Stanford right now and they were paying for my time, you can select Stanford University, you know, so you can attribute the company who you're working with at the time. You know, if you're building a website for UCLA or something, you know, and they're okay with paying for your time, definitely think about attributing them. If I scroll down here, here's the summary. I am going to cross this out because I have uploaded a patch. So I'm updating the summary as I go. If there was anything else I needed to put in here, I would, oops, look at that. I have a typo, so I'm going to fix that. Some of these might be collapsed for you. I'm going to now open the files and I'm going to navigate to where that is. And remember, for me, it's going to be a different place. I was in my Drupal folder. Modules, remember I did Drupal/modules, and we're in the CK editor font. And here's that patch. So I'm just going to hit, uh-oh, the patch looks empty. That's not good. Okay, do you see that the patch is empty? So I'm going to upload it anyway, because mistakes happen, right? So I'm going to hit save, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do, because this is a good way, this is a good learning experience. Oops. We want to delete that. We're going to hit save again. Oh, okay. So you see someone made a comment. So now my patch number isn't the same anymore. So now my anticipated comment number is 3. So now's a good time for us to go back and figure out why my patch didn't work. So if we go into my code base and we open this patch, it's empty, which is never a good thing. So I'm going to make sure I go into my folder and see why. So I've modified a README, I've done a diff. So maybe I'm going to create my patch a little bit different way. If I go back to my resources here, see, I make mistakes. So this is always good for people to understand it does happen. And I do create a patch. I'm going to look and see where I went wrong. I opened my terminal. I created a new branch. I was on the new branch. I made the saves. I reviewed the changes. Let's see, git diff. We don't have anything because we committed them. Let's try doing it a little different way. Let's try doing it this way. If not, we might have to scrap this and do it again. So this is the name of our branch that we had. We go to the terminal, we'll look and see what, we do get branch, it'll name our branches for it, or give us a list of the branches. Okay, so if I scroll this out, we have a git diff between two branches, 8.1 and 2. Let's see if this creates a better patch for us. There we go. I'm not sure why the first one didn't work, but now we can see that our patch file is no longer empty. Does that make sense? And remember that now our anticipated patch number is 3. So we have the name of the file, the unique node number -3. So now we're good to go. So now we go back in here. We're going to change this to needs review. We still have this. We're going to unassign ourselves, or unassign me. I'm going to change this. Cross it out. And now we're going to upload a patch that has something. So see, that's a little handy feature to have when you upload the patch. You can see that it was blank the first time, so we went back and changed it. And you can see here, the minus, that's the line that we changed, and the plus is the changes we made, and it's appropriate. So this is a good mechanism for catching things. We hit open. And we hit save. Okay, so now we have a patch uploaded to Drupal.org. We've created an issue. We made the changes. We put up the patch, and I'm going to show you folks how to review it because reviewing is a great step. Now remember, it's not best practices to review your own stuff, so I'm just going to make the motions. So as a person evaluating this issue, I can see it's tagged novice. I'm going to say I'm a novice contributor. I'm going to look at it and it says the README has a typo. Great, that's a great first novice issue for me. I have the Dreditor extension installed, so these buttons show up in Dreditor for me. Here's that quick review button. So you can see it's a diff file that's color-coded where it's really easy to see the changes we made. So I'm just going to hit cancel. You can see I uploaded that first patch. We're going to delete that. But this is what's great about this Dreditor extension. It actually spawns a Simply Test Me site for me, where it pre-populates some of the information for me. So there's the name of the project. Here's the release we wanted. And it pre-populated the patch URL for us too. So all we need to do is click Launch Sandbox, and it will spin up the Drupal site. Now, because this was a README does not show anywhere in the forward-facing. So the only thing Simply Test Me will do for us at this point will tell us if the patch applies. So we're going to let it do its thing for a little bit, and that's one way to test a patch. The second way to test a patch is, and if you go to my resources here, it'll tell you both ways, applying a patch locally. From the command line, you navigate to the project page where we were, where the issue queue was. We download the project repository. We do the version control tab like we did when we downloaded it when we were creating the patch. And then navigate into that project, and then we just do get apply -v, which will apply the patch for us. So we'll do that. So if we go back to the project page, and we're going to pretend we haven't seen this before, we're going to download the repository. So I'm going to open a new terminal window. And I'm just going to do it in my desktop for the sake of ease. So I'm PWD and I'm on my desktop, and I'm going to paste that command where it's going to clone. It's going to clone the repository onto my machine. And now if I CD, something went wrong. Hold on. Oh, it's not allowing me to do it in my desktop. So let's put it someplace else. Let's open a terminal window. I have permission issues on my computer because I'm not the only user because it's a work machine. So sometimes you have to do little workarounds. So if I do a PWD, I'm going to, oh, I was in my libraries folder, that's why. So I'm going to CD into my root drive. Now if I CD into my desktop, I love live demos because it shows all that we're all human. It also shows you a couple of ways to troubleshoot as you go. So this is really convenient. Like Bob Ross says, happy little mistakes. Oops. Let's look and see why that didn't work. I go to my desktop. I'm going to move it to my trash, and I'm going to try it again. Okay, so we're cloning it onto my desktop. We CD'd into the folder, and now if we go back to those instructions, it says to go grab the patch. So if we come back to the issue queue, the patch here, you simply right-click and open in a new tab, and it will open the patch in a new tab. And you can review the patch this way instead of using that that Dreditor extension review, but just a lot of white with pluses and minuses. And if you have a lot of files you're reviewing, sometimes that can be awkward and hard. So that's why I like that review button. But here's the patch. So we're going to right-click and we're going to save. And I'm just going to save it on my desktop because then I know where it is, right? And so the next step in is we've downloaded the patch, we've downloaded the repository. Now we're going to apply it locally. So we do get apply -v. And I'm going to show you folks a little trick. Instead of having to type out that whole path, here's the patch here. I'm just going to drag it over into my Finder. Makes it super easy. And I'm going to hit return. And it tells me that the patch applies cleanly. So now we know that the patch applies, which is great. Also, if we go into the Finder, which is hidden somewhere, let's say open period. If we go in here, and now when we look at the README, oops. If we look at the README, oh, why is it in the trash? Desktop. I don't know where it went. But anyway, what we would do is we would review the README in the repository and make sure that those changes applied. So we know that the patch just changed one little thing. It applies cleanly. So now if we go back into the issue queue, and I'm not going to hit save on any of these, I'm going to change the status to reviewed and tested by the community. I'm going to make a comment that says, I've reviewed the patch using Simply Test Me. I've also verified the patch applies locally. I looked at the code. The typo was addressed. It now reads required versus the misspelling. If you were to do anything beyond a typo, just be clear about what you reviewed, making sure that the maintainers, when they see that RTBC, that they know that you've reviewed it for everything. You've tested links, you've tested the UI, all that kind of stuff. So say there was something wrong with my patch, and when you hit review, going back to that Dreditor extension, you know, that diff file opens up for you and you select this, it opens that code comment window and you can say typo is still there, you know, saying it's still there maybe. And you hit save and paste. Now it's in that comment. So that makes code comments really easy. So just make sure that if the patch doesn't apply, you say that the patch doesn't apply. The patch does apply, but it has these things wrong. Just be really specific about how you tested and what you think is still wrong with the patch. And then you hit save. It's reviewed and tested by the community. I would say I maybe am an attendee at the first time contributor workshop. This is the first time I've ever reviewed things. I've only reviewed things a couple of times, you know, yada, yada, yada. Be very clear, be very, perhaps be vulnerable. And then when you hit save, it alerts the maintainers that a patch has been reviewed. And hopefully the maintainers will get back to people in a timely fashion and have a productive dialogue too, because that's all we can hope for sometimes is productive dialogue. Oh, Karen says, when I did the clone, I cloned it into the first code. Okay, so that's what went wrong. So, oh, okay. There's a comment that once I committed, the git diff will no longer show the difference. So that's why the second diff command worked, is because I compared the two branches versus just inside the repository, which is my normal workflow. But I was using the workflow on the version control page, which says this, but it probably doesn't say to commit the changes. So it does say to commit the changes. But anyway, so like I said, sometimes like going on documentation isn't always right. And so adding some troubleshooting would be nice for this page. That's something that we can like issue a feature request for. Or once we all get it to GitLab and we're doing pull requests, you know, we just make sure that the workflow is really dialed in and appropriate for all levels of users. So, and we're at time. Does anybody have any questions? There's a couple of hangups, but like I said, I kind of like that for troubleshooting, because you can be like, oh, that's right. When Amy June did this, she did this to fix it. I kind of like that. Any questions? You're welcome. And me and Lisa are gonna like be around later in the week for mentoring too. So if you want to reach out to either one of us in Slack, we can let you know when we're going to be in the contributed room later in the week, when we can kind of like do a round robin. Usually this workshop's a little bit longer, but we can do a round robin where someone creates an issue, someone uploads the patch, and then someone else does the review. You know, that's a real easy way to do it. And then kind of switch it for the next one, you know, and we have some issues in the queue that we can help with. So.
Okay. Thank you, Amy June. And I think I'm gonna take these recordings and post them to the site. And also everyone who's here, keep in mind we have, if you need assistance setting up your local development environment, come back to this room at 2 p.m. And make sure you check out the contributions webpage to just know what's happening within this room. And I think that's it. I think the keynote is going on right now too. Thank you again.